Welcome to Covering Our Bases. From Mets to Mariners, we break down baseball's biggest highlights and headlines with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. As we cover our bases, we aim to educate, entertain, and engage the average baseball fan who just doesn't have the time to follow the other 29 teams around the league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. He's NL's Dan Harrow. I'm AL's Warren Sprague. You can call me Al. And Dan, weather is playing a major factor all around Major League Baseball to start out the season. Pundits all over the league notice how delays and postponements have been an early symptom of a league jostled by theoretical climate change. A few affected teams come immediately to my mind, and I wondered if you could speak on the impact you see the weather making on the early MLB season schedule.
You're totally right, Warren. Like we've seen some crazy weather patterns. It is early spring. It's not unusual to see some heavy rain and some high winds in some parks that we don't normally see it in. But yeah, we've seen hail at some games. We've seen torrential downpours. We've seen sweltering hot days in Houston and Kansas City. We've seen torrential rain pour in Chicago. I mean, it's been nuts. I know the Mets had two back-to-back games rained out. We had a doubleheader on a day where we weren't supposed to play any games, and that's definitely thrown off our offense and our pitching rotation's normal days of rest. So, you know, all these different weather patterns are really affecting all the players out there, and that in combination with people just getting used to and up to speed with readjusting to the baseball season, I think it's affecting some pitchers and bats. We've seen a lot of guys maybe holding a little bit tighter. I don't know if you saw it. I saw Ronald Acuna Jr. looking
Mm,
like his arms were going to fall off. He was shivering so much at that game in Chicago. And like that has to affect performance. Of course, they scored a ton of runs in that game, so maybe not as much as we would like. But yeah, though the weather has been an interesting topic of conversation, and really the best example I can give is just my own team, the Mets. It's
yeah.
a it's a predictable ballpark we have in terms of rain and wind and all that sort of stuff. And we've definitely seen maybe not more rain than we normally do in the spring, uh, but definitely more wind in different directions, and the ball flying a little
Mm-hmm.
bit differently. The
Mm-hmm.
ball doesn't pop as much in spring as it does in the summer. That hasn't really changed, but the weather's definitely been a little more intense this year. Have you noticed anything along those lines?
Well, I think I texted you during one of the afternoons I got to focus on baseball purely and said, dude, you really need a roof on your field. And that's true. And I think it's becoming true for a lot of the older stadiums around the league that, well, need to be prepared to pivot around climate problems. And yeah, I've noticed. I was just watching the Baltimore Orioles Pittsburgh Pirates game, which means a lot here in the early season when
Yeah.
you look at these two teams getting off to the start that they're going. And I'm watching hail in the second inning or so bludgeon all of the different players. And you
Oh
mentioned it
man.
just seconds ago. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of gnarly. Welcome to spring, but spring has not sprung for all of these teams, and it's making a super big impact on their schedule. I was going to ask you, as a Mets fan who's been maybe the most impacted team by the weather so far, like, are you concerned at all that this is going to be something that derails enough momentum that the team can't set themselves up for success early on in the season enough to stand a chance in the division race down the line?
Yeah, man, you can make a comeback after a slow start, but it just gets harder and harder the longer it goes. And our biggest problem has been at the top of the order. The bats have just not been heating up. And then you have these 2 day breaks because of rain, and then bam, a double header. And it's not giving guys the momentum that they need to get their swing to up to speed and start making contact. And it's maybe people might call it an excuse. I get that, but I have never seen the Mets start out so slow. And there's more to it than just the weather, but the weather is certainly a factor. It's slowing us down, taking guys out of routine and not giving them a chance to just work their way up to being the consistent hitters that we know they can be. I mean, seeing Brandon Nimmo and Francisco Lindor with one hit each through the first 7 games is unreal. I've never seen it before. And yeah, the weather is definitely a function of that.
In baseball, you hear it over and over again. The name of the game is consistency. And with the weather not being consistent, the players can't be consistent, the outcomes can't be consistent, and your team is just hobbled from the start. So my heart's with you, and I think we're going to probably bookend today's episode with breakdowns on how we feel about our respective teams. We open with the Mets here. They are well through their first, 5 games? 6 games at this
Six
point?
games now, yeah.
6 games. You finally got your first win in the second of that doubleheader, in which you weren't even projected to play to begin the day, right? That had to be it, because the first doubleheader of the season, in my mind, was yesterday for those Mets. They were able to squeak out the win over the Detroit Tigers, handing the Tigers their first loss. We'll talk a little bit more on whether the Tigers are a riser for us by the end of the episode, because you can argue why not. Others of us could argue it's the strength of schedule, but we'll move on from that for now. But congrats on getting your first win. I know
Thanks,
that
dude. One down.
I know you, knowing how I feel about my Mariners, are probably like, hey, man, you don't need to be as down in the dumps as you're going to share with us by the end of the episode.
Could be worse.
But it could be worse. It really could. So a tip of the cap to the Mets for giving us a reason to not be too salty in Seattle. But I will be talking a little bit about why they're definitely a sinker for me by the end of this week 2 discussion. But welcome back to Major League Baseball, everybody. It's been a wonderful first week for many teams, and, well, God has interfered with some others, clearly. But let's kind of go around the league a little bit and start talking about some of the things that stood out to us in the various results. Maybe there's some patterns hiding in here. We like to call this segment base hits. So, Dan, why don't you give me your first base hit of the day? What's the knock that you want to highlight first?
Listen, man, I'm going to stick with the Mets. I promise it'll be the last time I talk about the Mets today, because there's nothing else to talk about. Oof. But I feel like we got to talk about the Mets opened the season against the Brewers, and there was a lot of instant controversy with the Jeff McNeil, Rhys Hoskins situation at second base. I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, or at least heard about it. To sum it up, Hoskins had a clean but looked like a relatively late slide into second. McNeil, it really should have been in a position to move his feet to avoid Hoskins, but he dropped the ball on the transfer, which kind of broke up the double play. Hoskins didn't break up the double play. McNeil dropped the ball, which broke up the double play. And McNeil really intensely reacted to the way that Hoskins slid. Bench is clear. There was no fight, but there was a lot of jawing back and forth. Hoskins called McNeil a crybaby, which was kind of funny. Rhys Hoskins was a Philly, so he's got a lot of history with the Mets. His whole, the first 5 years of his career, he was a Philly, and he was playing against the Mets 7, 8, 9 times a year, and a couple of playoff series too. So there's a lot of history there. And I just want to say, I think a lot of people may forget that the Mets had a pretty impactful situation happen in 2015 in a playoff series against the Dodgers. Our second baseman, Ruben Tejada, was taken out at second base by Chase Utley. It's a dirty play. Not going to talk about it. Point is, it's a little traumatizing, and it triggered a rule change. And ever since then, we've seen the Mets kind of approach plays at second base a little bit differently. I've seen other people talk about this week. The point is, the Mets are more sensitive when it comes to double plays, breaking up double plays, and how people slide in. They've been directly affected by it, which triggered the rule change that protects second baseman now. It doesn't allow a runner to not make even an attempt at sliding into the bag and just go towards the second baseman to break up the play. So McNeil wasn't on that team, it's important to say, and I'm not saying that he had a personal reaction. I'm just saying that as an organization, clearly the Mets are telling their players that this is how we handle plays at the plate, at second base. This is how we handle breaking up double plays. And there's a miscommunication there amongst the Mets and the rest of the league. I do think this was a total botched situation from the Mets side of things. Jeff did not react properly to this whole situation. He overreacted and made it a big deal in the media. Hoskins went out and went 3 for 4 the next day. And then after hitting a home run and getting 2 hits, the Mets tried to throw at him, which they also fucked up, which I'll bleep that, but like just they Metsed it up so bad, dude. Every way you
Ah,
can spin it. And I hate to say that, but it was an embarrassment. It honestly was. They did not handle the situation well. Our brand new manager, still without a win, gets his suspended for a game
oh
because they just
man.
assumed that they commanded that either Mendoza or somebody gave the order for this guy to throw at Hoskins, which they probably did. It's just sad, stupid. We're wraps into the whole unwritten rules of baseball nonsense. End of the day, Hoskins' side was clean. The Mets are just picking fights anywhere they can. And yeah, I don't even know what to take away from this other than that baseball is weird.
Well, you want to talk about a team that feels like, well, kind of scorned to start the season. It seems like the Mets are just, scraping to make things bigger than they need to be, but trauma be trauma. Every team's got it. I know I'm traumatized about strikeouts after 2023, but let's not let me make things about Seattle already. We all have those intangible storylines that really scar us from season to season. So I suppose it's apropos for this to be a focal point for your Mets team. Well, I remember us texting back and forth, and you were agreeing that actually Hoskins made a completely clean slide. And so, how does it make you feel? And I might as well just make you throw more dirt on your own squad. And I'm sorry. Trust me, I'll return the favor later. But how does it make you feel to be a Mets fan when you see that be their attitude and that be their sensitivity? Like, do you think they're big babies? And does it make it harder for you to root for them? Because I don't know, as a guy who tries to walk the high moral, pathway as much as possible, I don't really want to root for a team that's a little petty when things are unsteady. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a bad look, and it definitely is not going to get fans on their side. I'm not someone that's just going to blindly agree with Mets and all of their decisions. I don't I don't think it's a good decision. I don't think it was right to react the way they did. I don't think it was right to throw at Hoskins either. That didn't make any sense to me at all. Like he had a clean slide. It was reviewed and approved to be clean. He
Yeah.
didn't make a big deal about it in the media. Like I remember the next day I turned on the pregame show for the Mets and they were showing replays of it and talking to people. And I switched over to the Brewers pregame and they were talking about who the starting pitcher was going to be and the game. Like they weren't making it a big
Mm,
media circus. The New York media was. So I wasn't surprised that they went this way, and it doesn't affect my rooting for the Mets. It's just kind of sad that it got blown up. The throwing at Hoskins, though, that's really upsetting. I do expect more from the organization than that. That's sad, especially from a new manager. Whether he was involved in it or not, it definitely gives me pause and makes me start, well, questioning, I suppose, a little bit of some of the decisions that they make. And you don't want to do that as a fan. I want to support my team. I want to just, whatever
mm.
decision they make, whatever they do on the field, I want that to be the right thing. I want to support that. But this is one of those situations where I can't help but be like, my team got it wrong. They got it wrong. I'll continue to support them, and I can only hope that they change it in the future. But I can't agree with the way that they handled the situation.
Hey, one of the stats of this week as we get going on the early end is OPS. And Reese Hoskins is in the top 25 in OPS. I want to point that out. Sitting there nice and pretty around the 22nd spot. He's at 176 on OPS as we get going. And it's a player that's going to prove to be valuable, perhaps, for this Milwaukee team trying to remain on the upper crust of contendership early on. So it's interesting that MLB sides with Hoskins and gives an intangible amount of momentum to the Milwaukee Brewers from this storyline. It's more, well, it's more issues than you really want on your Mets team, I suppose, as we get started. When you've already got weather being a factor, the offensive incapabilities, you know, games getting skipped sooner than expected, and, the controversy around this situation. So you really want these things behind you. And let's hope weather at least will cooperate as you go forward, but let's not have that be part of your beef. Let's not have that be part of your karma, New York. Like, let's not tempt the baseball gods by being little crybabies in certain scenarios, as Hoskins so eloquently described McNeil to be. So I hope that we can like your team a little bit more as this season continues, because it's off to a shaky start, but we've probably hit more than a base hit on this one. We probably stretched it into a double, wouldn't you say?
That was a double. It was a broken double play.
There it is, exactly. I suppose we'll move on. I want to talk about Shota Imanaga, who was really important to have a good start after Chicago immediately lost Justin Steele as the season got going. We pointed out how the rest of the rotation needed to be strong to see how much of an impact Justin Steele's absence could prove to be. And I think the Cubs have responded around Imanaga to say, hey, we're going to continue to push to be top tier contenders in this division. And you see them getting some good puncher's chances against Texas, right? And we see them in a matchup right now of high profile. So Chicago's really trying to push to be still one of the top teams. And I thought Imanaga's performance was pretty strong. He took a new no-hitter into his 5th and 2/3 inning. And that was just his debut, of course. So that's really a hot start to come off of. He had 9 Ks for that big win. And that's big news for the Cubs fans, when you say, with that injury, it to Justin Steele, you really needed him to have a start like this, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Their rotation was thinned out with the injury to Steele. And Amanga, like we talked about in our preseason breakdowns, he was kind of a question mark. How was he going to adjust coming over his first season in the bigs? He definitely impressed. I think after seeing Yamamoto and some other pitchers struggle and just take a little bit of time to adjust to the pace and to the rest days and stuff, it wouldn't have been surprising to see Amanga maybe take a couple starts to settle in. But yeah, you mentioned no hitter through his first almost 6 innings pitched, over 5. I mean, that is insanely impressive. I don't care what team you're playing against. It doesn't matter. Those are big league at bats you're taking. So very impressive, and exactly what Chicago needed. And, you know, their offense has been pretty good too. So this is exactly what they need to help stay competitive in that division. And I think we've both been maybe a little surprised by how this division has performed so well so far. And this is the kind of result that Chicago needs to continue to see. And until Steele comes back, if Amanga can hold them up, they can stay in contention and still make a run for the division. They're not out of it yet. It's the second week of the season, and hey, Warren, they're not out of it.
Let's talk about that. We are fully aware that nobody's out of it. There's still so much baseball to play, and even though some starts are more disappointing than others, to say the least, nobody's here saying that a team is completely out of the running unless you're the Oakland Athletics. So let's highlight the fact that these Chicago Cubs get to sweep the Rockies and have a great win there, and otherwise have kind of gotten off to a pretty decent start. At least they scraped a win out from those Rangers, and that's a big deal. They're not in any position to call this a loss. They did also beat those Dodgers yesterday. I mean, or today, earlier today, the Friday, 9-7. Unbelievable. Can we at least tip cap to the Cubs for being able to outgun the Dodgers, for crying out loud?
Impressive.
Yeah. The results are really flowing through pitching a lot right now, and you'd expect that. It's a pitcher's game early on in the season, especially. Let's talk about a big base hit that you have to acknowledge for a team that's otherwise struggling to find good news in the early part of their season, the Houston Astros. You know, the oh-so-dominant American League powerhouse. They got a huge feather in their cap out of absolute left field in only the 8th game of their season. You know what I'm referencing, and you're kind of my pitching brain, dude. So talk about our next base hit. It's all about Houston.
Ronel Blanco stepped up to enter into their rotation due to some injuries that they've had coming into the season. We discussed them maybe considering signing a pitcher just to really make sure that that rotation does not hold them back. But they didn't. And they decided to use a guy that they've had for a couple years. He's had 7 previous starts in the bigs, Ronel Blanco. They used him out of the bullpen before. Wasn't expecting a whole lot, just hoping he can get through the game. And Warren against Toronto, this guy threw a no-hitter in just his 8th MLB start. Ronel Blanco, 7 Ks, 2 walks through 9 innings. A 10-0 win against the Blue Jays, and against the Blue Jays offense that we've seen can very much explode and really break out. And this guy held them back. Didn't see it coming. He's 30 years old, so it's not like he's a rookie or anything. He's been working his way through the system for quite a few years now and finally got his chance and took advantage of it. He had great defense to support him. He had run support, 10 runs the Astros put on the Jays that night. Started off with 3 right in the first, so he didn't feel any pressure. And he had a complete game no-hitter, and that's not something that's very commonly seen anymore. And already our first no-hitter in the books in the first week of the season, War.
Yeah, I would argue that kind of reset the momentum for the Astros. They were able to take 2 of 3 from the Blue Jays in their series and is now geared up to play the Rangers later tonight, Friday the 5th. And of course, so many eyes around the league should be on that game. Who wouldn't be excited to see how these two teams match up this early into the year? But yes, I blubbed a little bit. This was not. This was his 8th game, the young starter Blanco, and it was the 5th game of the season for those Astros after being swept 4-0 by the New York Yankees to open the season. So they needed that to go the way it did for Blanco to get off to a better foot. And yeah, they rode the momentum to a series win against that Blue Jays team that I think, quite frankly, everybody out there in covering the bases land, watching this and listening to this, I think Toronto is maybe the biggest X factor in the American League standings within these first few months. Like this, their start is going to define so much of the way the rest of the year can be projected. So if you're not watching any other team purely out of sheer curiosity for how the season will go, make sure it's Toronto. They really do seem like that team. And we'll talk more about who stood out from the lineup in a little bit. But a great note there, and congratulations to the Houston Astros young rookie pitcher. This is a big deal. There's a couple other rookie pitchers paying dividends that we'll highlight later on into our discussion. So please don't expect Blanco to be the only one to get a nod, because I've got a certain bucko in mind who deserves some kudos. But you did kind of dabble around one of baseball's lovable losers there in our discussion earlier. How about those Oakland Athletics? And I know one of our base hits focused on the fact that they had 13 freaking errors so far into the season. That's in their first 5 games played. That's obscene. We do want to stop for a second and discuss that, because it's a huge problem already, but it's also something kind of interesting because there are some teams, I think, there's actually plenty of teams playing really sloppy baseball in the first week, and I feel like poor Oakland is getting a ton of dirt kicked on top of it, despite already being one of the basement dwellers all around the league in people's minds. Like, do we really need the scorekeeper being so brutal as to hang 13 errors on this team? It's just making them feel even worse about who they are in my mind. We're talking about 5 in the first 3 innings of their 9-0 loss to Boston. They also were sending down their third best hitter. This is big. Their third best hitter isn't going to be in the lineup for at least a little while as they start to get tooled up. And it's just too bad, man. The Athletics feel like they're getting dirt kicked all over them. Talk on these 13 errors.
Man, it's tough. The manager referenced that it's something that they're just going to practice defensive plays in the field and work on it. And we talked about last week, opening day, guys had jitters. It's not uncommon that they lose the ball on transfers and mistakes happen, but to have 13 errors in 5 games is such a huge red flag. And I will say their next 3 games played, Oakland didn't have any errors, which is fantastic. But this just speaks to the amount of inexperience and honestly lack of talent on the roster. And this might really be an indication of what we'll see the rest of the year. This is an abnormal amount of errors in such a short amount of time. But I mean, I don't know, man. Maybe we should rename them the Oakland Errors or something, because this might be a trend that we see throughout the rest of the year. You can hope that they get some experience and they get a little bit better, but decisions like basically just fielding a roster that is not competitive but cost effective and taking like good prospects that they gave a chance to open the season and then sending them back to AAA to manipulate service time is not helping your big league roster. It's not preventing any more of these errors, and they do cost games. They've given up more hits and more runs than any other team in the league, and the errors just add on to that. They do not need this. If there's anything that they can do, like, It's play good defensive baseball. I get it. You're working on at the plate, working on all these other things for some players at new positions, but come on. This is too much. It's just too much. It's unsustainable, and something needs to change. Like, especially because we'll talk about it in a minute, but this will be Oakland's last season in Oakland.
Yeah.
So for fans of the team that are going to watch, they're watching one of the worst versions of their team put on the field. And that's just sad. It's just not right, Warren.
We talked a lot about last week. I mean, I swung by the fact that there's a lot of the morose in baseball. History is not, well, in a good mood when you look at the Oakland Athletics. This is one of the more dismal franchises in all of professional sports at this moment, and a fan base that's absolutely in mourning, preparing practically for its own funeral as it transitions into a lifestyle in Las Vegas that isn't excited to celebrate it. So it's just really a nasty situation for the athletics organization to be in. And, I'm sorry to see the play reflect that. If you really think about it, it's just such a shame for the on-field product to feel like less than going through the motions, truly and completely down in the dumps. And to see Estuary Ruiz be sent down in just, this portion of the season with the GM suggesting that he needs to be able to make bases in order to pay dividends, like, this is just everything you wish it not to be for, a team that already feels like a non-factor, if really at best. So demoralizing, depressing, beleaguering, so to speak, and, well, just an ongoing scenario for us to keep an eye on as we see if there's anything positive for us to take away about the Athletics later on in the season. But it doesn't seem like it.
Not yet.
Yeah, not a thing. Another base hit coming up, though, focuses on a different California team and maybe the epitome of the California teams. We should turn our eyes to Los Angeles and see what the Dodgers are up to. And you would say they're on an absolute blistering pace, wouldn't you?
Yeah, the offense has not slowed down. They are the first team in over 25 years to open the season averaging minimum 5 runs a game, and a lot of them they've exceeded that. And it's not just any singular person on the offense. I was ripping on Teoscar pretty heavily, and Warren, he must have tuned into the podcast because since then he's been on a tear. He hits home runs, you name it. The dude is doing well. He still has a few strikeouts. That number is still ticking up. We'll keep our counter, but he's doing a lot better. And really, Mookie is leading the way. He was hot in spring training, and he has not slowed down. He is still, I think his OPS at one point was at 1,800, Warren. I mean, it can't go above 2. That's insane. And not through one game played, through like 6. So, yeah, the Dodgers offense has been, I think, one of the weaknesses I mentioned for the Dodgers was pitching and the amount of runs they would give up. And we have seen them give up a fair number of runs, but their offense is more than making up for it. And I don't want to say it's sustainable throughout an entire year, but honestly, Warren, it's really hard to see them not sustaining it, even through injuries and a couple slumps. Like, they have enough depth on that roster that they could easily continue to average 5 runs a game like they have so far to start the year.
Yeah, it's a terrifying lineup, and we knew that going in. And I'm not surprised that Teoscar's strikeout scenarios may kind of fade into the background of our storylines because he's motivated to play well for this team. It's the right climate for him to succeed. We talked about how the lineup can buoy those scenarios when he's struggling with the currently 14 strikeouts that he has for 2024 for those who are waiting for our Teoscar counter. I'm going to be really interested to see how that ticks up from week to week, but 14's where he sits. This lineup is totally prepared to help guys like Muncy or Lux, or, well, we saw Taylor Trammell, a former prospect for Seattle, get picked up by the Dodgers once Seattle waived him when he couldn't make the team at the end of spring training. And I'll be darned if Taylor Trammell becomes an X factor for this Dodgers lineup. Like, oh my goodness. But the reality is as soon as the order turns over to their three-headed monster, the MV3s, as I'm going to continue to call them,
Mm,
and I didn't coin that, others
that's
have,
good.
but
Oh,
you look, yeah, I didn't make it up. I'm totally stealing it from some great writer. But when you see Mookie and you see Shohei and you see Freddie Freeman turning over the batting order, like there isn't a pitcher in the league who isn't going to sweat an immediate pint of excrement immediately, that they have to deal with this sometimes 3 times a game. Like nobody wants to face the three-headed dragon. Shohei finally hit his first bomb. You start to have the bingo card of stars knocking off their first home runs. We had Bryce Harper finally get off the board, and I'll discuss that because his game was incredible, where he got to do that. Aaron Judge hit his first just the other day. You know, you're starting to take off those superstars finding their footing, but there's no finding footing for that three-headed dragon. Mookie looks incredible, setting the stage, and it's only a matter of time before those three guys probably have the most OPS and most positive dividends paid to their lineup in all of baseball. So just watch those three if you want to see a microcosm of excellent baseball offensively anyway. Yeah, those Dodgers are scary. And yeah, I got to say it. You see how Juan Soto is definitely earning buzz and big kudos for being a huge part of the hot start the Yankees are getting, which you would have to gamble on. You have to expect that. This is a Yankees team that wants to win this year while they can. Juan Soto's getting all that American League love. On the National League, it's all about Mookie, right? You can only think of a few players who might get in the way as time is getting out to this start for the season. Maybe you can suggest like Acuna Jr. still looks like one of the bigger opponents. Maybe his own teammates, Freddie Freeman, might come to mind, but Mookie's all over that, right? And
yeah.
what kind of a slowdown would we need to see anybody else creep into this conversation?
Man, you know, it's a long season, and you never see somebody hold up a certain level of play throughout the entire season. There are peaks and valleys, and you just have to assume that if this is Mookie's peak, then even his valley is going to be higher than a lot of other players' peaks. So Mookie's a solid pick. I mean, for anyone else to upset him, it would have to be a crazy run that starts soon and lasts for most of the year. And we could definitely see that happen. But as of now, it's Mookie and everybody else.
I mentioned how OPS was an important stat for our discussion today. He is leading the league in OPS at 686, and that's over 200 points, two tenths. I'm not sure how to describe the decimals, excuse me. But I will say he's got quite a lock over the second place player, who I'll talk about in a little bit because he's not going to be playing for a while. Our second most OPS in the league. Another nod to what we'll talk about in a minute. But Mookie's on fire. He's scary. The season is long, but if he plays like this, everybody's going to be looking up to him by the end of the schedule. Not that we're surprised that a Dodger might be at that position, so to speak, but one more base hit. I know we've let this go quite long, as we feared it could. So let's discuss the Yankees and Diamondbacks series, perhaps one of the most exciting series in the early portion of the season. Talk to us a little bit about Wednesday's game, Dan, because I know this really set your interest afire on what happened between these teams on Wednesday.
Yeah, the Yanks were in Arizona. It was a 2-2 game going into extras, and Arizona was really utilizing a lot of bats. They made several replacements, and they didn't have a ton of extra depth. Some people may have seen this when it came down to it. In extras, both teams ended up scoring. The Yanks scored in 2 runs in the top of the 10th. Arizona scored 2 runs in the bottom of the 10th, to send it to the 11th. In the 11th inning, in the top. Now, this is going to get a little weird, Warren.
Okay.
In the 11th, Arizona, right, they brought in a relief pitcher. He ended up balking. He gave up a big hit to Aaron Judge. Diamondbacks manager later said he wished he had walked Judge. They ended up giving 2 runs up to the Yankees. So in the bottom of the 11th, Arizona had to score 2 runs, right? As they were going through the motions, they got one run on the board. They had 2 men on, and we had a situation where through events up into sorry, let me take that again. We had a situation arise that due to several substitutions earlier in the game, Geraldo Perdomo was subbed out for a pinch runner in the previous inning. That pinch runner was the last available bat off the bench, but unfortunately he was an outfielder. So they didn't have anyone to play shortstop. So what they had to do was take their DH, Ketel Marte, and put him at shortstop. I don't know if we've seen this happen before, Warren, but what essentially that does is that forfeits the DH position.
Yeah.
Since there's no other bats to come off the bench, now a pitcher takes that position.
Oh,
Warren,
no.
I was so sad when they made the universal DH. I remember talking to you about it and everybody else and saying, I am so disappointed we will not see a pitcher hit in the bigs again. Well, I was wrong, Warren, because they sent a relief pitcher to the plate with the bases loaded in the bottom of the 11th inning to get a walk-off win or at least tie it and continue the game. And unfortunately, it did not work out. Scott McGuff was the pitcher. After giving up a run in the top half of the inning, he struck out to end the game, and the Yanks got a very savvy win. And I got to say, a lot of credit to Aaron Boone in this situation, who saw this coming, walked the batter before, and had the pitcher come up to the plate. So really savvy move, kind of a managing battle that the Yankees got the better of last year's World Series team. So another impressive game for the Yankees and a really tough loss for Arizona to swallow. You have to assume if they had one more bat, if they had just saved one guy, that they may have been able to squeak a win out.
Well, there you go. Yeah, you answered the question that was coming up where I was going to ask, do you give more credit to the Yankees for forcing this scenario to play out, or do you indict the D-backs a bit for not planning ahead? It sounds as if we can give some severe kudos to the Yankees for playing as shrewdly as we can expect them to play with the start they're coming off to. And, you know, we will go, oh, too bad, Arizona. Look at you forcing yourself into a scenario that honestly wasn't projected to happen for the rest of baseball's history. You know, you and I can have a whole nother hour-long discussion, as we do like to do, about the meta of the game and the intangibles of the game and the patterns and the rules, where we might ask, you know, is the designated hitter really something we're going to miss when or having a pitcher, right, be in that position? I personally don't. I really don't. I love that everybody's got a designated hitter now. I don't think anybody should have to put somebody who isn't focused on batting to the plate if they don't want to. It really makes players like Shohei Ohtani stand out even more than legacy will have them stand out. But it also really does expose teams that don't play the chess game of baseball well enough in the moment to prevent this from happening. So you don't want the Arizona Diamondbacks, the team I'm definitely bandwagoning through the National League this year, to have that scenario befall them. This will be a huge learning experience for their management team, and really for the rest of the league. When they look at these Yankees, know that they're paying attention, know that they're super hungry to make the choices to set themselves up for success as much as possible. This is a Yankees team that is truly, absolutely going to do what they need to do to win games this year. And I was saying it before we started recording, I feel like they're sort of like the Angels from last year, where I felt like the Angels were ready to invest everything they possibly could to try to keep a stable product afloat, even as things started happening to tear down their season. I'd expect the Yankees to be that way this year. They've already made a trade to open the year. They've already really gotten off to such an amazing start. But if they don't, or if they face some injuries, I would put them as the most likely to buy their way through them. Forgive me if we're not in sync anymore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's wins like this that they need to take advantage of. But just to back on one point, there's always going to be situations before a game goes to extras that you're going to make the best decision as a manager for your team in that situation. You can't just assume the game might go to extras. In this particular game, the game was tied. I can't help but feel like you need to keep in the back of your head, you might need a bat later in the game. Like, you can't sacrifice yourself later for the best decision right now if that costs you the game. You know what I mean? And of course, there's no way that they could have known what was going to happen. But I just bring this up because the Mets have played a couple extra inning games already, and I've seen them use several pinch runners and pinch batters to the point where they enter the 11th and they have one bat left off the bench. And it's like this, I know these games don't go that long anymore because we have a runner on second, but this is a situation where they only had 2 extra frames and Arizona ran out of bats. And that can't happen. So yeah, lesson learned for Arizona, and probably notes taken from the rest of the league to go like, whoa, let's not let that happen to us.
And we'll see what other strange scenarios crop up in the next coming weeks of baseball. That's the kind of stuff we love pointing out. And so stay tuned, folks. What other strange anomalies can we dissect and make woven into the fabric of Major League Baseball to bring up in these, base hit types of discussions? But let's move on to our next segment of exactly what we wish to cover on these bases this week. And I do want to say there's plenty to take in from the eye test, to say the least. One thing that I wanted to point out is that the number 2 man in OPS, as I was referencing earlier, might surprise you. And I mentioned that this player will now find themselves on the shelf for the next couple of weeks due to some unsavory injuries that we're starting to see crop up and continue to crop up throughout the season. The number 2 OPS man to this point with a 1.415 was named Josh Young, and he is that compelling and capable third baseman on the younger side for the defending champion Texas Rangers, and he finds himself, sadly, undergoing a wrist injury. He's already had surgery on his wrist after suffering a hit by pitch from the Rays' Phil Maton earlier this past week on Monday. And that injury is huge. They're projecting him out at least 6 weeks, but I have a feeling you're going to say something more on this, Dan. Perhaps as we, notice that he was doing so much for the Rangers with that eye test, I want to point out that without him, you got to think the Champs depth chart takes a major hit. How do you think this impacts the Rangers being without our friend Josh Young for the next at least 6 weeks? And do you think we can expect to have him back, or the Rangers can expect to have him back in full tip-top condition at the end of it? I have a feeling you're going to say it's not that easy.
For sure. It definitely affects them immediately in that the Rangers have gone from having 9 very competent bats in their lineup to 8. It's, to me, and I'm sure to you, Warren, that's still a pretty good lineup, and I don't think it'll necessarily lose them a ton of games, but it's a hit. And if anything, I would say maybe it would be the first domino if we see some more guys get injured, unless he can come back before that happens. And like you mentioned, he is instantly given a 6-week recovery. Baseball players are incredible athletes. They heal quickly. They have the best doctors, and they get special specific surgeries for these kinds of things. But I can tell you, I would be shocked if he's back at full power within 6 weeks. He might be back on the field, and he might be taking at bats. But you know that all of the swing power goes through the wrist, and that will hold him back. He'll have to fight through some pain to get his swing back and up to speed to where it needs to be. If he even comes back in 6 weeks, if he can even perform and swing the bat well enough after 6 weeks, it's a risk. This could very easily extend much longer than that. And that would certainly start to affect Texas's chances, especially if they get any other injuries. So it's not a good look. I feel bad for Young, too, because he's such a great player, and he had a good start to the season before this happened. And also, can we just say, dude, like a Maton fastball, oh my gosh, man. Like, if that hit me in the lung, I'd have to get like an iron lung put in because I would lose it. Like, I can't even imagine stepping back up to the plate after having something like this happen to you, but I'm sure he will. I don't expect to be 6 weeks. I do think it will be longer, and I don't think it's a huge crack into the armor of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the first crack. And if they get multiple more injuries, it will certainly start to affect them at that point.
Yeah, it's got me curious. Is this going to be a team that shows that they're ready to buy their way through any kind of obstacles once again, too, like the Yankees would be, like a defending champion you would expect would be? So let's hope there aren't too many other dominoes to fall as they're, hoping to get out to the best start possible with the Astros as their next series, We're going to learn a lot about how impacted they are here in the next trio of days. So that might be the series of the weekend, if you
Yeah.
ask me. So
Let's
tune in.
remember, Warren,
Yeah.
though, that Texas couldn't sign Montgomery and is probably a little more cash strapped than we would like to believe. So it's possible they're not in a position to make any major moves. They might need to just eat this and rely on some youth to patch up the lineup.
Ooh, well, depending on how many injuries befall that lineup, that could hobble them at the knees, and that's not a position you want to be in. Really good point, because yes, if you couldn't bring back Jordan Montgomery, and that's why he ends up taking what extra cash the Diamondbacks were able to generate from their surprising World Series run. Well, that's going to open the door for the teams that are ready to put some money into their lineups to stay stable. Not just the Yankees, of course, Toronto is definitely that bubble team too. I wouldn't be surprised if a team like the Tigers, with what they've been able to do early on in the season, or wherever those Twins or Cleveland Guardians are, because they also still look like stable contenders in that division. Is there more money for the Royals to spend to keep themselves on people's minds, because they're not necessarily getting off to the fastest start, but they're in a pretty good position for the teams they've had to face, if you ask me. And, well, nobody needs to think about the White Sox. I don't know why I started to drift there mentally. There's a couple other teams in the AL West, though, that would consider spending some money. Maybe the LA Angels have more up their sleeve if they continue to play at the level they've been playing, but we'll save our risers and sinkers for a couple more discussions. Some more from the eye test, though. I did mention Toronto just seconds ago, and I'm going to share 3 players to me that really popped off the page when I was watching which games I got to focus on throughout the last couple of days. I want to see if you could weigh in on them. We'll make this kind of quick, guys. Justin Turner is definitely somebody I want to highlight. We talked about how Toronto shelled up their roster with lots of veteran pieces who may or may not pay dividends. And at least on one game, I want to acknowledge that the Blue Jays were able to split their 4-game series to open the season with the Rays, pretty much based off of Justin Turner's input in that specific game. I believe it was the 31st of the month of March that it was Justin Turner getting, a home run, a double, and 3 hits overall to really ensure that his 4 RBI, his 1 walk, all of this equated to really the focal point of a very potent Toronto offense that day to split the series with the Rays and go with the winning score of 9-2. Justin Turner is not somebody I expected to be an X factor as much as that game would suggest. What do you think? Is this an indicator that he's going all out for this Toronto team to really help them have the best year possible in a year where we know they really must win if they are going to maintain the litany of legacy players that they've had on their roster? We just can't see them investing too much more if they don't have an explosive year. Do you think Justin Turner could be the X factor for this lineup at age 39?
Yeah, man, I think he's already proven that he's the X factor. And I feel like everybody's just waiting for Turner to get old. Like the Dodgers, Boston, they signed him and he did well and they moved on from him because they see him ticking up in age, but he could still bat. Maybe he doesn't field as well as he used to, but he still has that killer swing. So absolutely, he's already proven to be the extra power and just on base that they needed. And I think that the Blue Jays might still need a little bit more, to be honest, but Justin
Ooh.
Turner is probably the reason that they've won a couple of their games already.
Well, let's keep an eye on him as really what could keep this team afloat in an incredibly crowded discussion for American League wild card and even divisional contenders. But speaking of divisional contenders, nobody saw the Pittsburgh Pirates coming as a divisional contender this early in the year. And I've read several articles suggesting that we shouldn't take this 6-1 version of the Pirates lightly, like we're assuming the team to fall apart like the 2023 version did with the hot start they experienced. Plenty of writers already suggest we'd be foolish to think this is temporary in Pittsburgh. Yeah, 6-1 as they get ready to wrap up their game with Baltimore, currently behind 2-5 in the bottom of the ninth, so it does look like they'll take their second loss, but against a Baltimore team that you'd expect to beat most teams. At least they're scoring every game, these Buccos are. But what's really blown me away is how capable the pitching has been. My second player to truly highlight with that in mind is Jared Jones, a rookie pitcher for this Pittsburgh team that came out and had an unbelievable debut. He also pitched for them today, and limiting Baltimore to the 5 that he has is not something to sneeze at. But his first game was really, really impressive. Pittsburgh got out to a super hot start, partly because he was able to really blow away his opponents that day in his first start. What do you think, man, about those Buccos? I think we'll talk about them a little bit more, but you couldn't have expected their rookie pitcher, Jones, to have such an incredible game to get them off to the start that they did. What do you think?
Yeah, you're right. Paul Skeens was the guy that was on my radar, and he didn't make the team out of camp, so I was kind of waiting for him to get there and make an impact. But Jones has really jumped out to a hot start. And you're right, admirable start against Baltimore. Definitely nothing to sneeze at. A lot of talented hitters on that team. You see more of these prospects coming to fruition for the Pirates, and we have seen them make an effort to lock some of them up, right? So this is the exact kind of talent that we were hoping we would see come up at the right time. And this is totally the right time for the Pirates. Everything is clicking. And the pitching side that we kind of identified as one of their biggest weaknesses, that's proven to be wrong. So this is exactly what they needed, and probably more than they even could have asked for. So hopefully Jones could just stay confident and keep building on this to have a strong season.
Sure, he spun the game he spun against the Marlins, if I'm not horrifically mistaken, and that's something to, take into consideration here. But a dominant pitching performance from a rookie is a dominant pitching performance from a rookie. And so kudos to them. They are in a great position starting the year, as they did just fall to those Baltimore Orioles. No big deal. This is a very important series too. So if you're not watching the Astros and the Rangers go at it, you may want to watch how these two early top shelf contenders are matching up. Can Pittsburgh bounce back against the Orioles in game 2? That's what I would be watching for. But congratulations to Jared Jones for having such an incredible start to his career. And good luck in his third start as he now takes the L for game 2. But anyway, he stood out to me in game 1 for sure, as the Pirates kind of have all together. And I wonder if I get away with a shred of I told you so, just because in our conversations, I've been wanting to put Pittsburgh higher up in the standings, but we'll let time tell. I don't want to get too silly.
You've been an advocate for them. I definitely kind of shunned them, and a lot of these same guys that are doing well, I've seen them struggle the last couple of years. I didn't think they'd put it together, but they are. You were right.
Aroldis Chapman can also be quite the X factor for that lineup, because there's something about him the same way that a Ryan Presley affects Houston, or the same way that a Jameson Tylon affects Chicago when he's around. Like, there's a pit bull in that man, and a certain amount of stability comes from having him in your bullpen, I think, at least mentally. So I really focus on him as an X factor too, amongst so many arms where Pittsburgh will need to excel in order to continue to be a contender there. Another surprising contender to discuss, though, in our risers and sinkers for that division. We'll hit that up here in just a few minutes as we start to wind down today's coverage. But first, Bryce Harper is my third player that I want to highlight super duper, because while he got off to an incredibly slow start, he exploded to help earn a win for his team, hitting 3 home runs on April 2nd to take out an otherwise extremely potent Cincinnati Reds team that I know we'll be talking about as the year goes on. But 3 home runs, guys. The first 2 were solo shots, sure, but he hit a grand slam homer with his third, batting in 6 RBI to give them a 9-4 win on the 2nd of April. And honestly, that team, if I'm not mistaken, did go on to win that series. So you got to expect the Phillies to be getting on a better foot after starting off a little rocky. Some are saying they're a little too far behind the Braves to still be a contender for this division. I would say hogwash, especially with the way Bryce Harper bounced back. I picked him as my NL batting champ. Probably won't happen, but he looked like one on that game. Do you look to Bryce Harper to be everything Philadelphia needs to stay afloat, or are there more pieces in that lineup that are going to be key? Is my eye test just too blinded by his greatness?
Bryce Harper's the face of that team, so they live and die by him. And he's not the only piece that needs to be doing well for them to succeed, for sure. But if he's not, they won't, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's great to see him kind of break out of a little mini slump and really show that he still got it. And I'm sure he's on a mission this season to make up for the last couple of years of disappointment for the Phillies, not getting as far as they wanted to, not getting back to the World Series last year like they wanted to. You know, as far as division, wise elderly baseball fans have told me many times before that they don't even look at the standings until the All-Star break. I get that. But you're right, Atlanta is one of the top teams in the National League, and Philly cannot sacrifice any games. They need to stay in the mix with Atlanta, and they are already falling behind. They're already below 500. And yeah, that can change very quickly, but Bryce Harper is definitely the ignition piece to help ignite the rest of the offense and hopefully get some more guys going, and they could start cracking in some wins. But great to see Bryce get started. You're right. Hopefully it's the beginning of a hot streak for him, and the Phillies will follow suit.
Well, with the Nationals on the schedule for this weekend, you have to expect they have a chance to get their better feet ahead of them. I need to eat my words real quick and point out that the Reds actually took the series with the Phillies 3-2, but it was Bryce Harper's explosive game that gave them the win that they were able to salvage there. So Phillies will live and die. At least that's what the early season says. They will live and die by Bryce Harper's output offensively. So either your Schwarbers and your Castellanos, your Marshes, etc., need to step up and become bigger pieces to that O. Or it may be, oh no matter how much Bryce Harper puts up for them. So there's your focal point of the Phillies' start to the season. And let's see if the Nationals give way so that they can get onto a better footing. They have the Cardinals to follow, which would seem like a bad thing if you're listening to Dan, but those Cardinals are pretty mid. Pretty mid. I'm only slightly slower than that. It's so early,
Warren.
It's so
early.
It's so early. Let's move on to some more eye tests. But we did have a good discussion of Atlanta there. I do want to say Atlanta does have some humanity to them. They gave up the first loss of the year, the first win of the year for the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox finally get on the board by beating Atlanta in Chicago. And so that's encouraging. There's a lot of humanity on display, is what I like to call, only because nobody's bulletproof, not even the Braves, against a team like the Sox. But you still couldn't quite see it coming that they'd give up an L to the Sox, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's a team like that doesn't want to lose any games, no matter what, right? So the White Sox, we've seen so much turn and churn with their roster, and obviously we know about their weaknesses, and it's nice to see them sneak a win. But I don't know how many games you've watched of them, Warren. They really are kind of an ugly team this year, and I hope that they try and improve a little bit. But yeah, Atlanta beat up on them a bit. I still don't see them even being as good as maybe we thought they might. They look like a bottom feeder to me.
Speaking of teams that we thought would be bottom feeders, the eye test cannot ignore the fact that Milwaukee is playing like a team possessed. And, I'm getting those 2022 Julio Rodriguez vibes from Jackson Chourio this early in the season because he's the focal point of everything they're doing, and he's doing a lot really, really well. Are you shocked by what Milwaukee's been capable of doing behind their young star and the hungry veteran Hoskins, who's ready to step in and pay dividends to his roster?
Yeah, I was surprised. Well, I was surprised Hoskins didn't get a good deal faster with maybe a better team after leaving Philadelphia. I was a little surprised Philly moved on from him. I understand why, because Harper's an option at first, but Hoskins a great ball player, and he always has been. And if anything, he's gotten better as he's gotten older. So definitely expected him to take advantage of this year and have a really good, strong year so he can go out and get a big contract somewhere, whether that's in Milwaukee or somewhere else. So not surprised to see Hoskins starting off strong and doing that. Churio, watch the Brewers play the Mets for the first 3 games, and I got to tell you, Warren, he is absolutely the real deal. He made some amazing grabs in the outfield, and he is menacing at the plate. He was a little slow to get started, but he ended up knocking more hits than several other guys on the team. So he's already getting up to speed. And this is why I love when you take these prospects and you start them on opening day, because honestly, they get the vibes and the jitters out so quick. A week into the season, they look like they've been playing for months, and it's so impactful on them the rest of the year. So Churio is absolutely the real deal, and watch out because he's going to have a lot of highlights this year.
You look at Baltimore and raise an eyebrow a tad. That's what I wanted to do to the camera in the direction of Baltimore, not playing Jackson Holiday, the other Jackson of great acclaim right at the moment, outside of Jackson.
One of the 5.
Merrill. Yeah, God. I'm looking for the other 2 still, but
we're still looking.
Record, we're expecting it any second now. The truth is that I wish that Holiday was already playing for those Baltimore Orioles, and who knows if they had, maybe they'd be even better than the I think 5-2 now that they must be at with their defeat of the Pirates just minutes ago. Not that they really need to be even hotter, but that's a big reason why I do feel like the intangibles are way more on the side of the Brewers than we thought they'd be this early in the season, and it's paying dividends. So, congratulations is what I want to say to Jackson Churio getting off to a great start. It's so much fun to know that Milwaukee baseball and really National League Central baseball is going to be so darn exciting, really, with all of the toss-up scenarios we're seeing between the Cubs, the Reds, the Pirates, the Brewers, and of course the last team is the Cardinals, right? The good old Cardinals. Like that's all of a sudden a loaded division if you think about the fact that everybody's got a real strong puncher's chance after the first week of the baseball season. This is a really strong division all of a sudden. So very, very watchable, very, very exciting. Kudos to those Brewers who, I'm just going to say it, they're one of my risers this week. I know we're spending so much time in this discussion, but they're a big reason why they're a riser for me, is because of Jackson Churio, because of what he's been able to do in Milwaukee, and because of all the wins that are coming with it. So, spoiler alert, I'll mention it later, but it's definitely the Brewers as one of my risers anyway. Not so much a riser and truly a sinker. Let's talk a little bit more on the Athletics. You kind of alluded to it. The Oakland Athletics are the basement of the culture in Major League Baseball, and now they're going to find themselves in a completely new home starting in 2025. You break the news to our fan base there, Dan.
Yeah, so Oakland has made several offers about extending the lease through 20. The site that the A's are looking at in Las Vegas is the Tropicana, which, Warren, I'm sure you've heard, you're still local over there, that they are already closed it. They're starting plans for demolition and probably implosion like they've done in the past in Vegas. I know it's a popular way of getting rid of those buildings probably by the end of this year. So Vegas is moving forward with the plans to build the stadium. Oakland was hoping truly that they would accept that lease extension. They would play at the Coliseum for the next 4 years. And then maybe there was a chance that within that they could still talk them into returning to Oakland. But that seems to have completely fallen apart. Oakland is not, the Athletics, I should say, is not taking the deal from Oakland. Instead, they've decided, after touring several different facilities, Salt Lake and Las Vegas among them, they have decided to take the team to Sacramento, where they will play in the AAA ballpark. I believe the River Cats are the team that plays there. Ironically enough, the River Cats are now talking to, if I have the name right, are now talking to Oakland about playing in the Coliseum because the A's are going to play in their ballpark in Sacramento. Moral of the story, though, is that the Athletics will be there from 25 until 27 at a minimum, with an option for 28 if the ballpark in Vegas is not ready. With this, they confirmed that they will not use the name Sacramento or Oakland. So they're just going to be the A's, or it's going to be the Athletics. We got a Washington football team situation here. So it's sad that it turns out the last season of Oakland A's baseball has already begun. And by the end of this year, they will be moving on to Sacramento before making their trip to Las Vegas when their ballpark is completed.
I would like to make a timestamp within our content. We will never have the Oakland Athletics as a sinker. They don't need it. They are already sinking. They are sunk. They are depressing. They are not exciting to come to Vegas for us locals. Like, this is not going to stop. This is maybe the franchise that is going to have the hardest time appearing relevant in all of sports for the foreseeable future, and I'm not happy about it. And there's no reason for us to kick more dirt on a roster or an organization that kicks dirt on itself. And this is the beginning of the end, truly. And I'm bummed. And the eye test only says that we might as well get comfortable forgetting that the Athletics are a part of this league. And until major changes are made that, hopefully will come sooner rather than later, just to really salvage the impression we have of the franchise, the organization, and the culture, there's just nothing to celebrate. There's just really not a whole lot to celebrate. You'll be grateful for any win this team puts together. It's almost like getting a free dub if you're across the field from them, just from the sheer intangibles that come with being what the Athletics are at this point. So, as a Las Vegas local, I'm only going to celebrate the Athletics for the new stadium coming to town that I hope will bring job opportunities to those of us who wouldn't mind working in baseball somehow. And beyond that, I will only celebrate it for the fact that, my fiance's Anaheim Angels and my own Seattle Mariners will be coming to town relatively frequently. And I don't have to leave town to have my weekend baseball fix. And you can say, hey, what about Aviator Stadium? And I love Las Vegas Ballpark, but I'm way more excited to get Major League games at home in my own hometown. That's the only reason why I'm stoked. It has absolutely zero things to do with the Athletics themselves. And I think that's the best case scenario I can envision about how people are feeling in Las Vegas about the Athletics coming here. For now, it's really ambiguous as to whether they'll be celebrated at all from the onset. And with the product they're putting on the field, it's unlikely to be celebrated for that reason for some time to come, despite your Rookers and your Geloffs and your Ruizes, I suppose, even if they're called down. It's a bummer. It's truly a bummer. And that's the end of that, because how much more dirt can you kick on a franchise that's already 6 feet under? Now, our final eye test topic to discuss before we hit our risers and sinkers and fly our faces away to see more baseball going into week 3. I'm sure that was the worst segue I'll put out in all of our discussions there, Dan. But let's go ahead and pay homage to one last eye test article, in that you cannot have the eye test and not notice the uniforms. This has been a big, big topic of discussion throughout all of Major League Baseball, dating back to spring training. Immediate disappointment on the quality of the uniforms being put out. And we're starting to hear examples all around the league of orders not being placed for the appropriate uniforms, them coming back looking ugly. Everybody is just not focusing on this aspect of the game from an organizational standpoint. Like, teams are apparently really sleeping on this, yet still finding frustration over it. Talk to me about uniforms and what you have to say to them before we hit our risers and sinkers today, Dan.
Sure. Well, you're right. Teams are trying not to make too big of a deal about this because baseball players have been proven to be very adaptable. And this has made a lot of noise in the media, but MLB is very clearly just letting it all happen because I think they truly believe if we just get through the season, it'll be fine. And then no one will talk about it again. Now, that's probably not entirely accurate. It's not going to go down that way because we're going to have some other things that pop up from this. But MLB is not changing things. They were very reluctant even to make concessions about altering players' pants to specific heights and things, which they did end up doing, but only for a very select few of basically abnormally tall pitchers where the normal pants just could not work. So they're really holding their ground on this. It's a multi-billion-dollar agreement they have with Nike. Is a lot of money tied up on this, unfortunately, which means we're not going to see as much change as we'd like. That's just the fact of the matter. So with that understood, a couple things I'd like to mention, things that people are noticing and just an explanation of why. It's not necessarily the worst case scenario for each of these things. The big one first is the letters. Everyone has made a note about the lettering. I don't think anybody likes the lettering. the main thing that to take away from it is the letters are smaller. And I think a lot of the conversation has been it's because they're lighter and they're better for performance and all this sort of stuff. Well, that is part of it. It does reduce weight. But conversations with Nike have revealed that essentially by trimming the jersey, by making it overall less material, which of course saves them money, but is also supposed to be better performance uniforms for the players. You'll notice on your jersey, Warren, and all your old jerseys that on the back of the collar, the MLB logo is nestled very neatly underneath the collar and above the name. It's kind of perfect. There's a nice little line. You see that white strip going around your neckline. The logo will be right in there. But when they made these changes to the jersey, they adjusted the collar and the neckline. They made them shorter. MLB didn't want their logo removed or out of sight, right? So they dropped the MLB logo down a little bit lower than where it used to be. That required them to shrink the lettering of the nameplates because the only other thing they could have done was move the letters down and move the number down. And then the number would have been towards the bottom of the jersey, which wouldn't have been aesthetically pleasing. We would have been complaining because you probably would see the number tucked into the back of the pants, which nobody would have liked. So what did they do? They shrunk the letters, right? That was like the least impactful thing that they could do, which obviously pissed everybody off. And I say it's something that will probably go by a couple years and we won't even notice it, but it does just generically look worse. So
yeah, for now, I'm still, when I'm in the early part of the season, before I really get to know players' numbers by habit, I find myself squinting a little bit more to notice who's doing what. Like the lettering is already making an impact even to me in a very subtle way. So I'm not surprised that that's a hot topic for them. But please, I please continue.
No, you're fine. Thank you. And so like that, with that in mind, that sounds like something they could probably adjust if they move the MLB logo. Maybe they can get those letters. That might be something they're looking at, but that's at least the explanation for that. Another thing I noticed actually what kind of caused me to look into this a little bit more was the Mets were playing Detroit. And it was pretty obvious to the naked eye that Detroit was in their road grays and the pants gray did not match the uniform gray. And I looked into it, and that actually happened with a lot of teams, specifically with the grays. And the reason is pretty simple is in years past when it was Majestic, these uniforms were being made by the same vendors, same manufacturers, and now they're not. What's a little bit more upsetting about this whole situation is that Nike designed these and they commissioned Fanatics to produce all these jerseys, right? Well, Fanatics was getting these orders in last year, starting to get everything ready, and they noticed that the grays were different colors. And they alerted Nike, and Nike said that the difference in the shades are negligible enough that they are acceptable. And they told Fanatics to continue. And now we are literally watching players walk out with two different colors of gray. And this is something that Nike knew about and said, hey, that's okay. So, I mean, to me, that's just a huge, like, we don't really care. We're more concerned about the money thing. That's pretty upsetting to me.
And we opened up discussing how consistency is so important to the game of baseball, and consistency across uniforms, and with the history drenched in, uniforms for teams. Like, it's crazy to think that this is good enough. That's the attitude we're hearing a lot. It's good enough. It's fine. It's whatever. A strange lack of caring for the consistency in the colors and the hues of our beloved teams. And I mean, it's all about money. Why? I thought baseball's alive and well. I thought it's well attended. I thought Shohei Ohtani's turning around viewership like no other individual player. Like, why are we seeing this be a money-mongering scenario? I don't see other leagues failing to, put quality uniforms on the backs of their players. Why is baseball the one that is skimping on this? Very, very regrettable. But that's not all, is it, Dan?
No, just a couple more things because there's so much more. I mentioned that we had some hot days out there in Houston and Kansas City, and we actually saw players drenched in sweat in late March, early April, in spring. It's very unusual to see. And Nike talked about how these jerseys were designed to be moisture wicking and to dry up to 25% faster than the other old jerseys. Well, it sounds like what that means is what the jersey material is made to take the sweat from your body and move it to the outside of the jersey, which in theory would mean you would just continue to produce more sweat, and it would just get wetter and wetter and wetter in the same spots.
Mm-hmm.
Interviews with the players show that the players are not feeling that, which is good. So that is an improvement over the
Yeah.
cotton jerseys, that they don't have sweat just pooling. However, visually, it's more apparent. Nike's already said that they're looking into fabrics that maybe change less color with moisture, so that's something that they can adjust. Overall, this is something that looks worse than it is. It's not really negatively affecting players. So that's kind of a good thing.
Let me tell you, this one's very cosmetic. Yeah, this is just Major League Baseball recognizing the fact that people talk trash all the time on baseball players not being true athletes. So all they did here was adjust the uniform so that it actually shows the exertion that the players are executing by showing off those sweat stains. All they're doing is saying, guys, we have real athletes, we promise. Either that or we just have men with a tremendous amount of body odor. So that's the downside to that look now that I think about it. My response was mainly just a joke. I was just teasing. Obviously, this isn't Major League Baseball trying to make it look like their athletes are real athletes. They shouldn't need to do that. It is, however, an incredibly unappealing indicator of how overactive some of these guys' sweat glands are. We talked a little bit about how cold weather is certainly impacting certain teams, rainy weather, wet weather, what have you. But cold weather has been a hot topic in my mind for a certain team that has gotten off to a ridiculously cold start. But now hot weather also obviously having an impact on at least the visual part of the game. It's good that it's not affecting the players too much, but it is affecting the way they appear. They don't look all too cleanly and all too comfortable. At least I'm glad to hear it's not bothering them yet. Anyway.
Yeah, yet is the key thing, because this is still April. And when we get to July and it's twice as hot as it is right now, this could become a problem. So we'll see what that develops into.
Beware of chafing. And that
it's
nightmare will be real. Let's go ahead and timestamp this. I predict that by August, at least one player will be put on the 10-day IL for substantial chafing in the
Anthony Rendon.
Oh, fire truck Rendon. All right. And finally, overall, while I did take a moment to pit stop on the Mariners there, those of who couldn't visualize it couldn't tell. But yeah, I was talking some trash about the Mariners and their cold start. One more uniform note, the Mariners didn't get to take the field in their signature Sunday creams this past week because it just sounds like they didn't order their uniforms in time to receive them to allow tradition to be carried out. Talk about how delays make up our final note on these uniform challenges we're seeing in early MLB season. And if you guys are finding uniform content compelling, I want Dan and I to do like a uniform breakdown. Not that I know of too many new uniforms coming to MLB outside of the negative
City Connects
changes we're seeing. Yeah, I'm not seeing any new City Connects being announced yet. But if you guys want to have more uniform talk, let us know down in the comments so we know this is a part of the game you would want to hear more of our opinions on, because we do like discussing which ones are pretty and such. But I think uniforms are going to be a focal point of so many conversations throughout the rest of the year for so many different reasons. But yeah, talk to me on those delays, bud.
Yeah, definitely. Well, fun fact, Warren, for those that don't know, our first podcast together was all about, I think our first 3 or 4 podcasts were all about uniforms. We're both pretty passionate about uniforms. And yeah, the M's have these beautiful cream jerseys that I'm sure you and I certainly was looking forward to seeing. They were announced, they were scheduled, and then the M's came out in their whites. And everyone was like, huh? And it turned out that they didn't have them yet. The team had not received the jerseys. And this is kind of a weird one, because it turns out when you talk to Nike, they say every team was given a delivery window of certain jerseys. They knew that they weren't going to have every team's 4 or 5 different jersey options available on opening day. So they gave them a package. It basically said you can get this special package of maybe this City Connect jersey delivered by April 1st. And then there's another delivery date of May 1st. And then by the end of May, let's just say. And they gave the teams the opportunity to schedule their games according to that delivery schedule so that this sort of thing wouldn't happen. But it did happen. And it happened with like 3 other teams this past weekend. I believe it was Boston, and possibly Kansas City. I might be wrong on that, but it happened with other teams as well. St. Louis, I think, was one of them. So it's weird that teams are saying that they planned on having jerseys and haven't gotten them, but Nike's saying, no, we told them they wouldn't have them. Nike's saying there are no delays, that everything is going according to plan. So that, if they're both right, then this is just a miscommunication, which is even worse on top of all the other miscommunications and lack of communication we've had. I mean, this just kind of compounds it even more and keeps the uniforms in the conversation. So not something that Nike wants. At least we know the uniforms are on their way. But yeah, we've already talked about uniforms way more than we want to or should in a baseball season.
There you go. That's really the overarching point I'm taking away from this is like, this just seems like sloppy management all around, poor communication all around. Like, I work in Las Vegas hospitality, and this is a strange way to connect it, but I will share that I find the management all around Las Vegas hospitality following the pandemic has taken a massive hit as far as the quality, the composure, the overall consistency. Am I right? I wonder if we're just seeing management overall throughout the various industries that used to be so stable and so strong and so composed. Are we seeing management just fall through the cracks here and just fail to plan appropriately, communicate appropriately across both the production industry as well as the teams themselves? Like, does anybody want to do their job right is what I'm really trying to say. And I'm just going to leave it there because whoops, this shouldn't be such a huge focal point. It just shouldn't. It's a little much, but it's there. And I'm waiting for my Sunday creams, okay? I want my Sunday creams.
You keep waiting till June, probably.
You know, I cannot wait to break down today's risers and sinkers as our final segment to this first, or really second, week of baseball breakdown, reviewing really the full first week of baseball on the schedule. So let's go ahead and use this to kind of bridge the gap and say that, I thought I had a good segue, and I did a couple seconds ago, but I don't anymore. So let's try to take that again. So yeah, the uniforms are sinking for sure. Overall, as a topic in Major League Baseball, but not sinking as much as the sinkers that Dan and I want to present. The teams that are really losing momentum from our expectations, or really just spent the last week struggling more than we anticipated. Now, that's not to say any of these teams are out of the running for their divisions, for their wild cards, or for their prospective 2024 seasons. But for now, they're letting us down. And so on that vein, let's talk about our sinkers and risers, the teams that are doing better than expected, as we say goodbye to today's coverage. Dan, I wonder if you want to just, actually, maybe I'll do it. How about I talk about all the sinkers right off the bat? All right, my first sinker, Dan, has got to be the San Francisco Giants. The Giants maybe are a team that's approaching Oakland in that we've already kicked plenty of dirt on them, and there's not a ton of reason to bury them more, except that this is a team that's supposed to contend in their division. This is a team that's supposed to contend for a wild card, especially in your mind. And at, 2-4, they're not necessarily inspiring a whole lot of faith, especially when you take into account that they've already had a divisional loss against a rival in the Padres. The other team that seems to be battling for that. They are 3-5. They are not quite rising to expectations. These Giants are one of my sinkers. What do you think? Am I too anxious to kick dirt on this one?
No, man, I was pretty high on this team, and they've already fallen behind the Padres. And yeah, it's close, but the run differential is -9, and to me, that you're not a playoff team with a negative run differential. So that's already kind of jarring that they're one run away from double-digit negative.
Especially when you brought in a couple bats that are supposed to be there for some pretty important run production. Chapman's not living up to the billing. Soler's not living up to the billing. You could still speak on Junhoo Lee being off to a good start for the San Francisco team that really needs him to be a glue guy between some bigger bats. You can also still look to guys like Wilmer Flores or maybe, let's see, Tyro Estrada, right? Both still helpful bats, but they need to be putting it better together. This offense needs to flow better. And honestly, the pitching hasn't gotten off to the most compelling of starts either. So, San Francisco, you're a sinker this week, and we'll leave it at that. Another team I need to call a sinker and super duper apologize about has got to be the Miami Marlins. I pointed out that they had a really good first game against Pittsburgh in a losing effort last week when we had but one day of games to discuss. So I think it's pretty clear that this is not a Miami team that's extremely exciting. They find themselves essentially winless at this stage of the game, completely winless. Even still, even St. Louis was able to drag out a win against them yesterday in a very compelling battle of basement teams this early in the season. I will still say that the Miami Marlins seem like that team that you put on the field with enough pieces to be competitive, but almost lose on purpose at the end to help others look better. Like they're almost like really good for a team that doesn't have a win yet. I do like some of these pieces and think there's potential there, but not to win a division, it looks like, because too many teams are doing just a little bit better. I like a Burger. I like a Chisholm. And I'm really here for the Tim Anderson redemption arc. But Luis Arias has not been looking like himself to start this season. There's already plenty of buzz around moving him and the possibility of moving their big, well, leftover ace, Luzardo, at some point this year because the trend is not going positively for Miami. So I'm sorry for calling them a riser last week. They are 0-8. They are in need of a turnaround. Go ahead and point fun at me for trying to make them sound good last week, bud.
Hey man, it was early. I get it. Like you didn't even mention Warren. Yuri Perez went down for them too. Tommy John surgery has another hit to a rotation that did not need it. So things don't even look like they might get much better for Miami unless the bats really heat up fast.
In the early going, I think you're very good at being pitching minded, and I tend to take a look at offensive input. So I love that you did point that out, and it's just another reason to put a pretty strong, rusty nail in the coffin for the way the Marlins are looking right now. Yeah, it's kind of a bad situation to have one more piece of their rotation go down with a season-ending injury, the dreaded TJ. So this is not a good place for the Marlins to be overall, and they're still probably going to be competitively pushing to look like they can beat any team out there until they do get that first win. But it's only a matter of time maybe before plugs are pulled and we start looking at, well, the fire sale that could come out of Miami. And I'm not sure that's really what any of us would wish for this team. We want a more compelling National League East, and they're just not off to the best situation whatsoever. So definitely one of those teams that's in danger of falling completely out of winning consideration, and one of those that we may not want to kick too much harder as time goes on. And my final sinker, as you duck out of sight, Dan, because you know the cannonball's coming, I'm going to go ahead and let myself sit on my pedestal for a minute and certainly admit that my Seattle Mariners are not the team I expected them to be to start this year. Now, let me not be pigeonholed as somebody who's, ready to burn my own team ablaze too soon, because I'm not that crazy. I am crazy enough to say, though, that I expected the mentality of this team to be so much better. I've watched plenty of Mariners baseball, and there just hasn't been anything to celebrate because the offense looks like they're pressing. The defense looks like they're unfocused. The pitching looks like they smelled their own stuff too much and expected to kind of waddle out there and continue to be them and not expected that teams would adjust. So Castillo looks bad in his first two starts. When I say bad, I use that loosely. It's like aight, but we don't want aight. We expect our ace to be an ace. And to make matters worse, George Kirby struggled in his first outing, only in the first inning, though, before really helping to paint his way to a win for the Mariners in Game 2 against the Boston Red Sox. But his second start on Wednesday against the Guardians, I want to paint this picture for you, man. I hopped on my stationary bike. I'm like, I'm gonna have a great workout. I'm gonna watch, George Kirby, the smoothest pitcher in this entire rotation, dance his way to a series win against these Guardians. I'm so excited. And he was gone by, I think, 3 2/3 innings because he gave up 5 runs to a team that would, I think it was actually eight, scary 8 runs.
It was
Most,
a Warren because he was in my lineup that night, so I remember.
yeah. Yeah, fantasy baseball. I was the one who poked Dan to say, "Hey, commit to your Cy Young winning selection and go ahead and grab him." And I feel bad because 8 runs, the most that George has ever put up, were put on him to in favor of the Guardians, who would take that series. So all across the board, we're unfocused. All across the board, we don't look properly coached. All across the board, our offense has done nothing. I was talking about how superstars are getting ticked off the list on who's hitting home runs to start the year, and I think to this day, to this moment, only guys like Dom Canzone, Mitch Haniger, and our friend Dylan Moore, who's a utility piece for us, have been ticked off that list. Not Julio, not Cal, not France, who I'm definitely looking to who is our best hitter. He's got 8 hits. He's our best hitter right now is Ty France and his drive line modified swing. JP Crawford, as you said, relegated to your bench on fantasy. Like, we don't have anything working for us. And there was literally a crash in infield between JP Crawford and our new second baseman, Jorge Polanco, who you just can't have that. You can't have that. This is not the team I expected. So we're a sinker. You go ahead and talk on that. Let me know, how scared should I be? Is this a team that's going to turn it around? Does any part of it look like that? You have to expect they can only go up from here.
Is this the second team you had as a riser and now as a sinker from
No,
last week?
I didn't call
were
them
they
a
not?
riser. They were not.
Good. Okay. I think that it's still early, and you mentioned it, and I do think it matters. It has been cold, especially in that Northwest region. And I think that does affect guys. And I'm not trying to make too many excuses for them, but as of now, the Mariners pitching hasn't been enough, and the bats haven't been enough of what was expected. It's just everything is falling just short of expectations. The team is still good enough to win more games than they lose, even though they haven't thus far. Their run differential is a -14 right now, which is probably not going to be sustainable with a team with this much talent on it. It's just a matter of how long it takes for them to get up to speed and start winning more games. The one thing I'll say on the rotation side of things is last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Warren, I told you that there was no way that the Mariners would have the same 5 starting pitchers a month into the season. I think they've already lost at least one of them. Might be another one, depending on what's going on with Kirby, if he's hurt or if it's just who knows what. So there's already quite a few roadblocks that they're hitting. I think you're right to have them as a sinker right now, and they definitely need to take their knocks. But I will say that I saw Canzone break out of his little slump there with a big, powerful home run, and that's something that you needed to see. And Haniger's getting a couple hits, and the rest of these guys, it will come. So give us some time, Warren. Don't get too buried into your own expectations there. I tried to warn you about expectations, brother. I tried, but it's still time. You're not the Mets, okay? You've won more than one game, so good job.
Exactly. Right. And I needed to remember that. Like, before I came on here and hem and hawed in front of you, I'm talking to a Mets fan who is having arguably the worst start out of any team expected to be decent, right? I mean,
Yep.
we're up there, Seattle is, but Mets are struggling, and they're not supposed to struggle this much. So we're both in that same boat. Now, you got to do me a solid and give me your sinkers, and good luck.
Sure, man. I mean, yours were all great. I'm going to try and pick a few different ones on here, and I'm going to start with the Blue Jays because I was pretty high in the Blue Jays. I was really happy with their offseason decisions. I thought that they made the right moves. They got some lefties. They got good defense. They got more on base as opposed to just power, and they still got guys like Justin Turner who can still provide that power when they need it. But we've still seen Vladdy and Bo be hot and cold. And we've seen like the Jays just won 3-0 today, and they've got shut out in 2 of their losses. And it's just not acceptable. This is exactly the problem we've had with this team. this is what I talked about had to be different this year. Already, it looks like it's not. The Jays are sitting at 500. They're negative 11 run differential. It's just already puts a bad taste in my mouth. I'm not happy with the way that they started. The bats could heat up, but it still just looks like a hot and cold team. Like I feel like as soon as Vladdy and Bo start hitting, then Turner and who knows who else might start to dry up. Like I don't see enough of consistency from them already, and they have to be a sinker for me. What about you? What do you think?
So for me, the Blue Jays are the most exciting team in American League Baseball because they are the bubble. They embody the team that is going to define the wild card race with how well or how poorly they continue to make their way through the season. So I'm really kind of unprepared to call them a sinker because when you look at the strength of schedule, first they earn a split against the Rays, arguably another one of those bubble teams that, if anything, for you and me, trends downward, right? They're not a team that we would call a playoff team. So sure, maybe they could have expected a series win there, but there's enough in Tampa that keeps them relevant, especially with a bat in their hands, that we really couldn't knock them too much for earning a split there. Then you take a look at their second series, in which they did drop 2 of 3 to the Houston Astros. But listen, buddy, I talked to you about how OPS is the stat that really means a lot to me right at the moment. And we look at the OPS leaders across the league. Yanni A. Diaz is fourth place with an OPS of 1.248. Jose Altuve is in the top 10, an OPS of 165. Alvarez is in the top 15 or so. He's got a 129. And Pena, he rounds out one of the top sets of OPS players, right? I'm going to call it top 20. Certainly because Hoskins, I think, was 22, and he's somewhere down this list for me. So he's got to be like upper 20s at 124. Point is the OPS is right waking up. The players are waking up in Houston. They were going to need to rebound off of getting swept 4-0. So I expected them to be a little bit more fiery than the Jays would be coming off of earning that split. Though that was an interesting series to see how they would match up, and it's okay that Houston wins that one. So now I think the eyes are on the Jays for this upcoming segment of their schedule. They're getting ready to face the New York Yankees, and they won game 1 against those New York Yankees 3-0. And that is not easy to do. So a sinker, not yet. They're right where they need to be for me. This is a Jays team everybody should be watching super duper closely. But it's okay. Who else is a sinker?
I hope you're right on them. And it's funny you're talking about their series with Houston, because the next one for me, Warren, it's the Astros. It's got to be the Astros. And it's not because of the bats. Because as you said, the bats have been fantastic. They were slugging against the Yankees, and it still wasn't enough. They're actually one of the few teams with a losing record, 2-5, and a positive run differential of +7. So that just shows you the bats are working, and they're not getting the pitching support that they need. And to be fair, the Yankees really overpowered them, but I'm really putting a lot of this decision into that Yankees series because it's Houston and the Yankees. This is very possibly the matchup that we could see in the ALCS or deep into the playoffs, as we have in years before. The Yankees are clearly going all in this year. It might be their only year of Juan Soto. They are going to make it count.
Yep.
Houston has to be better than this team in the regular season and the postseason. And the Yankees proved they were the better team to start the year without Garrett Cole, we got to say. So that is a huge knock against the Astros. We talked about how their pitching was supposed to be a strength in addition to their bats, but really the bats are bolstering the lineup here. And let's remember, one of their 2 wins was the no-hitter we talked about from Blanco.
Right.
So
right.
They've really won 1 game behind decent pitching other than that. That is really jarring. I mean, Verlander has already not been with the team, and he's starting to work his way back up, but I'm really hesitant about him getting up there in age, how he's going to be. He was good, but had a couple rough starts at the Mets last year, and that continued with Houston. So there's definitely concerns here. I mean, this division isn't a given anymore, as I'm sure you'll agree, Warren. Houston really was chasing with Texas, with Seattle right on their toes last year. They're off to a bad start this year. The offense is doing great, but their pitching, if it doesn't get better, they will not win this division. So this needs to get fixed fast.
As much as I agree with you, and I really do, there's clearly a weakness there. The truth is they're offensively built to wade through this generally, as long as there's even a marginal improvement to the pitching scenario, as shaky as it can seem. And when you look at the strength of schedule, sure, you really wanted to perform better against those Yankees in those first four games and get something, and they didn't. Certainly suggesting they deserve to be a sinker from that standpoint. Then they go out and win 2 of 3 against the Toronto Jays, telling us that they're probably still capable of being a playoff team and helping the also Rans fall behind like a Toronto team threatens to be. So they're not as, again, in the dumps as some of the teams we've talked about already here, but there's potential for it to be if they don't turn it around on the mound. So fair enough. Hey, I'm always happy for somebody to, quell the fire within those Astros. And fire truck the Astros is the motto in this household. Of course, the F being something else. So I'm fine with them being mediocre, but I'm terrified of Alvarez. I have tremendous respect. I'm terrified of Tucker. I'm terrified of Altuve. I am terrified of Pena. I am terrified of the arms that when they are at their top level capabilities. This is one of the scariest teams in the league, no matter where their standings are. I'd expect this matchup with Texas to be an incredible suggestion of how strong they really are. So keep an eye on that game tonight. I'm hoping I get a front row seat. It's all about Texas and Houston right at the moment. Big series. Cool, buddy. Who's your third sinker?
Yeah, man. So for me, the third one, just like these first two, it's not necessarily bad teams, but just teams that are not meeting expectations that were put on them. It's the Phillies. They had a really rough start to the season, and they're same thing. They're a negative 14 run differential. Not too concerned about the standings because I think them and Atlanta are going to be right there because I don't think the other teams in the NL East are going to be competitive enough to be up there with them, the Mets, the Nationals, and the Marlins. So that battle is going to go on throughout the whole year. That's not as much of a big deal. But these teams opened the year against each other, and the Phillies did not play well. The bats were okay at the start, but they definitely cooled off, and the Braves just overpowered them in pitching, in depth, in game management, in every way you can name it. And the Phillies are supposed to be the Phillies, I should say, the Phillies have been kind of Atlanta's curse the last couple of years, especially in the postseason. And in the regular season, it's kind of gone back and forth. This is an indication that Atlanta really is taking Philly a lot more seriously than maybe they have in the past couple years. And the fact that they overpowered them so heavily is kind of a red flag to me because these teams are going to be battling for a division lead. And if they both make it in the postseason, they will almost certainly play each other. So all that should matter to the Phillies is, can they beat the Braves? And right now the answer is no. And unfortunately, we've seen slumps from other bats. Harper broke out of his slump with that 3-homer night, like you mentioned, but they were struggling pretty heavily before that. Castellanos has just been cold to start the year, and we've seen him. He could take a while to get hot, and they don't really have time to wait for that. So I'm concerned about the Phillies. I think that they're in a situation right now where they're going to lose more games than they win unless things change quickly.
An interesting concept and totally fair when you take into account that they did drop 2 of 3 against Atlanta. There was a fourth game that would have been played that did end up postponed. Oh, did we talk about the weather already? My bad. The Reds also took 2 of 3 from them. So first we see, obviously, like the contender in the National League whoop their butts. And then we see a pretty interesting team. You can argue maybe the Reds are the Toronto Blue Jays of the National League to an extent. I'm not, because the the window is closing for the Cincinnati team. It's really just opening. But the Cincinnati Reds are the focal point, I think, of the National League wildcard race and divisional race. They're the most interesting team in the National League that can go either way, much like the Jays are for me in the American League. Big ramble. But the point is that that's a bubble team, and losing 2 of 3 to the bubble team is not a good look for a Phillies team at this stage. But if I may be bold enough to predict that this is probably the last time we're going to have the Phillies as sinkers for the foreseeable, as we see their schedule coming up, my friend, the Nationals are their next trio of games. You can argue probably 2 of 3 come home with the Phillies for that one to start earning their first series win. Then they have the Cardinals. You can argue another 2 of 3 come home for the Phillies in that one. Then we have a really interesting 4-game set coming up the 11th through 14th in April with the Pirates. And that is maybe their next big, super interesting test. You can argue both teams, super interesting test there. And then after that, they get 3 against the Rockies. And then they get 3 against the White Sox before they revisit those Reds. So a lot of opportunities for the Phillies to get some pretty important, comfortable wins, right? Not too many tests in the next couple of weeks before they have a chance again at the Reds to see where they stand. So look for a very different Phillies team to walk into that series, and that's where we're really going to see where the early legs reside with this Philadelphia squad. But I had a sinker last year on them, or last week on them, right? I called them a sinker last week. You call them a sinker this week. By the way, it was the Astros' second week in a row sinking for us, so interesting stat there. And we'll have to see which of those teams falls off the sink next week. I'll think of something more clever to say in the future. But this show has already gone maybe double as long as we expected, guys. We will try to make these more bite-sized conversations in the future. We hope you're enjoying yourselves. Thanks for listening in. We're going to bring it home with our risers to wrap it all together before we say goodbye to you all and turn our attention back to Major League Baseball, as my Mariners are about to take the field in about 30 minutes, and you better believe I think we've squeezed enough out of this episode. So for our risers, I will remind you all that I do have the Milwaukee Brewers solidly in the rising section. Both of us felt like this Brewers team was ready to take a step back. The intangibles were feeling pretty mediocre at best. This seemed like a mid team on paper as the season got going, but we have underestimated the power of Cheerios. Like, this guy is all over the place. He's getting the defensive stops. He's starting to hit the offensive stride. He's gotten some extra base hits and certainly hit his first home run of the year already. Check that off your bingo card of stars hitting home runs. And this kid's a star. They've got a great supporting cast really emerging around him too. Hoskins is not somebody who's just here to phone it in on a year where he still wants to show everybody he can contribute. And between those two, that's really all you really need to point to say this is a team to watch. So kudos to Milwaukee. I already talked them up too much. Do you agree, though? Do you think this is a flash in the pan, or is there more of the same on the way from Milwaukee?
Yeah, watching this team, I was very impressed by how well they can hit, and honestly, how their bullpen's a little bit deeper than what I expected that they would have been. So definitely, they're a team on the rise.
Amen. Also on the rise, at least for the moment, I would be a little bit remiss to not acknowledge that the Red Sox are playing quality baseball. They split 2 games with the Seattle Mariners, of course, certainly overachieving so far in that category to earn a riser acknowledgement in my mind. And sure, they swept the Athletics. And I know we're not here to kick dirt on the Athletics, but a sweep is a sweep is a sweep. And they didn't let the one win that the Athletics have scrapped together come at their expense. So they're now geared up to face another riser for me in the Anaheim Angels as the next series. So it'll be really interesting to see where my last 2 risers match up truly against each other. I've gone on record to say I'm a bit of an Angels fan. I really do root for this team to do well. My fiance loves them to death, and there's still some compelling baseball to be watched when you think about the fact that Mike Trout is pretty darn sure he's not washed up yet. That Taylor Ward is back in the lineup and is looking ever so much the heart of the lineup that I wanted him to be. I really do argue he might be the soul of the Angels this year is Taylor Ward, and his offense is looking that way. And the young pieces, whether it's your Shanuels or it's your Netos or it's your Renjifos, like this team is doing what I hoped they would do to start the year and taking advantage of their chances. So both the Red Sox and the Angels, their weekend series has got my full attention because simply one must step back, and both are staking a claim to the top tiers of their divisions. So I'm excited to see which one is more strong. What do you think of those 2 teams, man? I'm sure both are not going to end up risers at the end of the year, right? These are both teams we expect wheels to fall off of at some point because history would suggest, or lack of investment in the case of Boston would suggest, that that's an inevitability. But at least for now, they're playing better than we thought they would, aren't they?
They are. They definitely are. And the Angels, I think, they've squeaked out a couple closer games more so than some other teams. So I don't know how sustainable that is for them. But man, Warren, I got to eat some crow on Boston because I expected them to be one of the worst teams in the league. And they have actually given up the least amount of runs of any team in the league. And all of their games have been on the road so far. So two really hard things to do and that they've been able to accomplish 5-2. The Red Sox are. I still think they'll fall off. I still think they won't make the playoffs, but for sure they are doing better than we expected.
Yeah, I agree. A little crow for you. And I do expect this again to not be a consistent place for the Red Sox and Angels to look as the year goes on, but I think teams slept on both a little bit, and there's still enough potency in each to make for some compelling baseball. And we would be remiss not to point out that the Angels are looking like risers thanks in 0% to the 0-19 hitless Anthony Rendon, the true basement dweller of all baseball players in the Major League Baseball, ether, if you ask me. Not a fan. Fire truck Rendon is how I feel, to say the least. And now I will ask you to present your risers, Dan Harrow, so that we can bring home this show in style. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it. My first riser, it's the Pirates. Warren, you were high on them. Maybe they're performing as well as you expected, but they're doing way better than what I would have thought. They're playing well on all sides of the ball. The youth has been hitting the ball really well. Starting pitching has been solid. Like strike to schedule, they've played a couple easier teams, but they've played some gutsy games, and they are currently leading the division, and there's really no reason why they can't keep this momentum going. Very impressed by the Pirates.
The Pirates have me excited, and they did before the season started because I felt it in my gut that something cool was about to happen. Now, I know something cool happened last year when they got out to a 20-8 start before everything really changed. And as I said earlier in our conversation, I've been reading articles all week suggesting that we shouldn't expect the same from this lineup. Several of their wins have been come from behind scenarios. I think they're one of the few teams I've been able to pay close attention to that have not suffered a shutout loss yet. They're scoring in every game and looking like a team that is capable of scoring fairly reliably. Because of that, we're seeing Brian Reynolds put up numbers. We're seeing Ke'Bryan Hayes arguably be one of the better batters in the National League, one of those sleepers for the NL batting title at the pace he's going right now. Not that I'm saying it's going to happen, but it's a thing. We've seen Triolo play better than they probably anticipated. Rowdy Tellez is a great veteran fixture in that lineup and has been paying some dividends, looking poised and hungry. He reminds me a bit of what Justin Turner needs to be for Toronto. I guess Toronto's the team on my mind the most this week. But to be candid with you, I love it. I'm excited about it. This is compelling stuff from the Buccos. And if this is the year where they finally break a playoff drought, in my mind, it feels like it's a lot longer than 2015 since they made a postseason appearance. Like, I'm really excited to see if this could be a year where people actually root for Pittsburgh baseball for a change and the start of something completely new. So let's see when the wheels fall off. Right now, there are even professional pundits saying we shouldn't expect it unless some unforeseen events happen. And it's got me chills. I just got a nice little bit of chills to think that black and yellow could be represented in the playoffs for the first time in quite some time. But I know, too early to tell. But I love that you gave some love today.
Yeah, it's still early, but no, absolutely. Like let's give them their respect. They've earned it. And they're a riser for me. They've earned it. The next riser, though, it has to be the Detroit Tigers. They had a super hot start to the season. I got to watch several of their games, and I got to say a couple things. Torkelson, entering his second full year, he is doing really well to start off the year. The rookie Colt Keith, he was a little slow to start, but he actually broke out against the Mets, had several hits and some really good plays in the field. So that guy is absolutely going to be a star in this league. He's already a key part of their offense. And I got to say, what impressed me the most, the Tigers' bullpen is really good, Warren. Like, they were shut down for over 3 games, and it's a big reason why they've been able to limit other teams to just 17 runs against them. So definitely a riser for me. The Tigers, I think we underestimated, honestly, the strength of their pitching. And if their young prospects keep hitting like they have, they can definitely compete in that division.
There's no reason for them not to be able to compete. It's true, because there's so clearly a lot of dichotomy between especially them, especially the Royals, especially the Guardians, of course, and especially the Twins. Those 4 teams are going to be dueling a lot, and the strength of schedule, I mean, sure, we didn't anticipate the Mets to be the Mets on this level, but the strength of schedule does suggest that they've had an easy trip, these Tigers have. They swept the White Sox, and they only dropped the second game to those Mets, in the 11th hour, and that's their one loss so far. They have the opportunity to sweep another team in these Oakland Athletics, of course, over the next 3 days. Then they get 2 against the Pirates before having 4 against the Twins. That's their first major test. I mean, the Pirates are obviously a test, but 2-game series to me are like, they're just, you throw them away a little bit. In my opinion, either you power through and you have a ton of momentum and you win them both, or you're really in the dumps and you lose them both. Like, it just isn't, I don't care too much about 2-game series is what I'm trying to say. It's not really an indicator of the matchups and the strength between the 2 teams. It's really that first 4-game set against the Twins that'll tell us a lot of what we need to know. And that's, again, that really exciting weekend of the 11th through the 14th. So check that out. When mid-April rolls around, I know my eyes will be on it. But Detroit is looking real enough for sure. Not as real as the Guardians feel, but I'm really excited to see how those 2 really interact with each other, the Guardians and the Tigers, because both were really hard for me to choose who might dethrone the Twins. And even then, I know the Twins were almost a riser for both you and I this week. The Twins are definitely a team right in the middle who can still do what they need to do to win this division. So it's really interesting stuff. Can't wait. But yeah, good choice. I almost had the Tigers as a riser this week too, so I don't blame you at all. Who's your third one, though, as we get ready to go home and see some more baseball heading into week 2?
The third riser for me, it has to be the Yankees. I'm not super happy about it, but I have to give them the respect they deserve. Juan Soto has proven to be the addition that they needed. He's doing everything they planned on doing. The Yankees have won a lot more close games than even the other teams in their division. Their run differential is only +4, but they got a 6-2 record. So they're winning games when it counts, when it matters most. Even though Garrett Cole has been hurt, Stroman and Cortez had pretty good days pitching. We've seen Stanton get a couple hits. We've seen Judge do pretty well along with Soto. We've seen great defense from their backfield. The outfield of Soto, Verdugo, and Soto has been pretty amazing. That's something to watch as well. So
I'll just step in long enough to say Soto, Verdugo, and Judge. I think you said Soto twice, or So,
did I? My bad. Yes, Judge,
it's okay.
Soto, and Verdugo. Yeah,
you're a little under. You're still a little under the weather there, Dan. So thanks for powering through and having a good conversation with us this week. And it's true, I've seen so many of those proud papa shots of Aaron Judge like walking over to embrace Verdugo and Soto, and you might easily call that the star-studded outfield in maybe all of baseball. I can't think of a roster off the top of my head that has a more strong-looking outfield trio. It's all about injuries. Keep Aaron Judge perhaps away from center field, because not only does he potentially get injured easier in that position, but he also kind of takes his time running out to those deep center field fly balls, I noticed a couple times. So I don't know if he's super motivated to crush that position. We'll have to see if that can eventually be a way other teams might take advantage at some point. But for now, the Yankees show is as compelling as we would expect it to be. And make no mistake, guys, I don't think there's any other team in the American League that is willing to do as much as needs to be done to win a World Series this year like the Yankees. Yes, more than the defending champion Rangers who couldn't pay Jordan Montgomery. Yes, more than, gosh, the Minnesota Twins, whose offensive lineup is super fragile. And while they could still win their division, they aren't really interested in paying to do so. Same can be said for most of the contenders in that division. Red Sox didn't pay money in the offseason. Why would they start now, when even if they are right beneath the Yankees in second place of the division? Toronto's already paid as many players as they possibly can, and while they will maybe be the most likely to pivot around obstacles to contend with those Yankees, I mean, Toronto has a lot to work through in order to make the playoffs, making them so compelling. The point is, these Yankees are the ones who are going to do what they need to do to win this year in the American League. Watch them to find out really how far they can fly. It's theirs to lose. So, interesting stuff, and a completely fair choice for the final riser. Dan, dude, you sat down saying, hey, 45 minutes and we're out, right? 45 minutes of compelling conversation and we will be okay with where we're at. So, from me to you guys, including you, Dan, I'm sorry that we've been talking for an hour and a half at least. I hope you feel these bases are beyond covered.
Yeah, we definitely covered the bases, and we might play with our format a little bit in the future and try and narrow it down so it's more concise and more informative. But it's still the beginning of baseball. There's a lot to talk about. There will be weeks when we're scrambling, finding things. So let's enjoy it while it lasts.
Would say it's still early goes to us as well, right? That old baseball cliche. We are but 8 games into the year at max for all these various players. So much can happen over the course of the next 154. We hope you're enjoying what the season looks like so far. Let us know down in the comments if you're enjoying our content, where you'd like to see us flow through. I have a couple of different ideas of different content that might be super fun for us to dissect that others aren't really doing, like those umpire scorecards. I texted you earlier this week saying that I've already got a couple people who'd love to hear us have that kind of breakdown in our content. So if you're among those guys, let us know in the comments, because I saw some pretty cruddy umping over the last couple of days, Seattle and beyond. So let's talk about that. Or let us know down in the comments if you're pretty sure the Angels and the Red Sox are not going to be risers for much longer, and it's really fragile to see them at that position. Let us know down in the comments if you're really just as disappointed that the Mets are in the basement to the level that they are. Is it weather's fault? Is it the uniform's fault? Let us know, because we want to see the Mets not necessarily look the way they've looked. Let us know down in the comments if you're understanding why my ship is truly reeling in Seattle, and how we really do wish for a turnaround in the tides for us to rise. And let us know down in the comments which of these divisional champions or in the early going are most likely to hold their position. Is it those Pittsburgh Pirates, guys? Is it a different set of swashbuckling seas we can expect out of the NL Central this year? I don't know. So much can still happen. So let us know down in the comments if you're enjoying the way we cover our bases, and if you have bases you wish were covered otherwise. But in the meantime, we're going to go watch ourselves some more baseball. We hope you do the same. Have a fantastic weekend, and we will catch you next time that we take a trip around the bases.